morning, everyone. My name is Tom Watkins, and I'm the Vice President for Cox Business Virginia. I'd like to welcome you to today's event. This is our first ever online executive discussion series, and 6 months ago, none of us could have predicted that we'd be here today in the middle of a pandemic that has caused us to social distance and work remotely. Hopefully, we'll be able to get back together for the coming events and share those great breakfasts that have become part of the EDS. As many of you know, we've been conducting the series since 2009, and today is our 45th edition. We appreciate your making time and joining us remotely today. At Cox Business, we're also very proud and excited to be partners with Inside Business for the Executive Discussion Series. I want to thank them for all the demanding work that their team puts forward in helping bring these meaningful events to life each quarter. John Donnellan and the team do a fantastic job, and we appreciate them. I also want to thank the Cox Business Virginia marketing team led by Barbara Sykes for the work that Kathleen Conway and Marissa Covington have done on the series as well. Today's topic, apropos, is getting back to basics. And if you've attended our EDS events in the past, you know that we are fortunate and blessed to have Cathy Lewis with us as our moderator. And as you'll see today, she does a phenomenal job at each and every one of our events. And in these extraordinary times, Cathy Lewis continues her work with leaders. She's helping them leverage powerful online tools to rethink their strategic plans and communications so that they emerge stronger, smarter, and more focused on what really matters. It's interactive and collaborative, and it's all virtual. Cathy Lewis is also one of Virginia's most popular radio hosts. In fact, she's in her 24th year on Hampton Roads Public Radio, and more relevant than ever with powerful conversations about the pandemic and racial injustice. Ladies and gentlemen, our virtual moderator today, Cathy Lewis.
Thanks so much, Tom. Boy, are you right. Who could have ever imagined that we would be sitting here in this moment? But I want to just underscore the thanks that you gave to the team at Inside Business and Cox Business Solutions. They just jumped into this quickly and effectively, and I think we have a highly interactive panel for you this morning, and I'm so glad. I think we have more than 300 people on the line this morning, so that means there's great interest in the topic, and you all never miss a bet on that. And also, there will be an opportunity for you to put your questions in the chat. Now, some of you, many of you, sent questions ahead of time, and we're grateful for that. And we'll be addressing those questions through the course of our time together. But if a question occurs to you, or if you didn't have that opportunity, do be sure to pop those questions in the chat, and we will get them just as quickly as possible into the conversation. And I'll tell you one thing I'm really excited about this morning is that we have a couple of pop-up polls. So that's going to be kind of fun. You'll get a chance to, on the spot, reply to a poll, and we'll have the results for you almost as they come in. My thanks to Billy Garland for being on that for us. So the only requirement we had of our panelists this morning is that they had to know what they were talking about, and all of them do, and that they would change out of their pajamas. And I am glad to tell you that all of them have. Now, if you're in your pajamas, good on you. Good on you. That is exactly the way to watch this day if you have the opportunity to do that. But I'm really thankful that in the midst of a very busy and complex season that all of our guests have joined us today. And I think what you'll see throughout the course of the conversation is that regional leaders in this community are really collaborating on a process that will help us through this moment, but certainly, hopefully, make us stronger on the other side of this as well. So I'm really happy to introduce to you our guests this morning. We'll start with Doug Smith. Doug is the president and CEO of the Hampton Roads Alliance. Doug, great to have you. Thank you for being with us this morning.
Thank you, Kathy. Great to be with you.
I wonder, as you look out, and I know you've done a lot of talking to business leaders and thinking about these issues, as you look out, say, 12, 18, 24 months, what do you see in terms of the health of the regional economy?
Yeah. So I would tell you, I think we all got into this, Cathy, whatever it's been, 8, 10, 12 weeks ago, thinking we were in a 6 or 8 week problem and we figure out how to reopen in June and get back to work quickly. And obviously that's changed pretty dramatically. And we'll talk during this call, I'm sure, about a framework that the business community is putting together called the 757 Recovery and Resilience framework, and it's really a process that we're going to go through over the next 9 or 10 weeks to come out with an economic recovery strategy in the fall. Now, I would tell you, when you talk to the folks at the state, there is optimism that about half the jobs that we've lost will come back by the end of the year. But the other half are going to be 18, 24, 36 months in coming. But nobody really has that crystal ball, but that seems to be some of the current thinking.
So let's talk about that framework for a minute. What does that look like, and how are you going about soliciting input from all the regional economic players?
Yeah. First of all, the we is a really collaborative group. Sean Avery is part of this group, but Sean and our peers on the regional groups, the 2 chambers of commerce, the 2 workforce alliances, Reinvent Hampton Roads, ODU Strome College, and others, literally talk every other day. And part of what we realized was that we were going to need an in-depth strategy to come out of this. There will be, and we'll talk about this more perhaps during the call, there'll be 10 committees. Those 10 committees will meet 4 times by video conference, ask 6 pretty particular questions, very specific questions about what they see as needing to happen for the recovery. And our expectation is that we'll come out of that process with 3 to 5 big ideas for us to really get behind, to push over the coming 18 or 24 months to get us back to pre-COVID employment numbers. And make one other comment. Unfortunately, the regional economy was sluggish when this started. While I think we had some really good things going on in terms of collaboration, when you looked at our numbers of regions our size, there's 39 of them. We were 35th for job growth, 36th for wage growth, and 37th for GDP growth. So we've got, we had just gotten back to pre-recession job numbers. So we've got our work cut out for us, but I think we've got a very good framework for developing a plan that'll help us do that.
It strikes me in talking with leaders all over the community that in these first 6 to 9 months, say through the end of this year, it's a complex thing. You've got not only this plan that you might need some work, you've also got the idea of getting employees back to work safely, who's coming back to the office, who's still telecommuting and the like. Did these business leaders, in the midst of all of that complexity, how did they respond to your request to say, look, I'm going to have to ask a little bit more of your time, a little bit more of your expertise, so that we can talk through some of these larger issues, so we come out on the other side better off? How enthusiastic were they about that?
Obviously, extremely. And I would tell you, and I've only been in my role for about 9 months, so I can't take any credit for this, but Sean and our peers really have spent the last 3 or 4 years crafting personal relationships and working together. And so, as I said, we jumped on the phone every other day during this crisis, and we tried to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts and that the work that we're doing is complementing one another. And I think, like most of the folks that are on this call, it's Wednesday doesn't feel much different than Sunday these days. It all sort of blends together. And I think, if anything, folks are trying to figure out how to get a little bit of work balance back. But folks have really been quick to jump in. We have these 10 committees. We'll have 2 chairs and a vice chair. And as we've called around asking folks to volunteer, it's almost, I don't even have to get the full sentence out to where they say, I'm in. Whatever I can do to help, I'm in. So I think there's no real desire to help.
Yeah, that is really encouraging. And if you head over to the 757recovery.com website, is it .com or .org? It might be .org.
.com, you got it.
If you head over to 757recovery.com, you can find all kinds of specific discussion areas. There's some blog posts, there's some videos, there's an opportunity for you to ask any questions. And one of the issues about which people had a lot of questions and continue to do so is this PPP loan process and whether there will be another one in the offing. And we're awfully glad to have Ann Connor with us today. She's the president of Public Finance and Community Investment at Town Bank. Ann, great to have you here this morning. Nice to see you.
Thank you, Kathy. Good morning.
Good morning. So how have these stimulus programs affected business from your perspective? Looking at your company, as well as many others, has been responsible for deploying these funds in the community. And I don't see Ann's picture, but maybe we'll still hear her. How has this really affected small business? And
The PPP.
yeah, go ahead and talk, and the picture will come up.
Kathy, can you hear me?
Yes, go right ahead.
PPP program has, as the program developed over time, become very of the federal stimulus through the passing. So,
Ann, I'm just going to interrupt you there just because we're having a hard time hearing you. So what I'm going to suggest is that we move around the circle, and Billy Garland will get back to you to try to see what we can do. But right now, you are frozen in place. So 20 years from now, if this remains, it's beautiful, and you'll be good to go. So hang on the line there, and Billy Garland will with you to get that squared away. Sean Avery is with us today from the Workforce Council. Sean, you know, I was noting what Doug said about the fact that the state economists think that half these jobs are going to be back by the end of the year, but the other half, kind of who knows. What are you hearing in terms of employment for the region?
Well, we're hearing about the same things that Doug's hearing, so really what we're doing now is going on the offense and trying to work with those individuals who may not be brought back on after being furloughed or laid off. And so that is opening up some great opportunities. Before COVID, we were really in a talent deficit. We were having some issues finding individuals who were qualified to get into some of these jobs that we had open. And now we're in double digits unemployment rates. And so there are some individuals that are interested in maybe switching careers and going into those areas that we're having a hard time finding jobs. So shipbuilding, ship repair, we've got offshore wind on its way here. So we're really looking at, okay, well, maybe these jobs aren't going to come back in the next 12 to 18 months. So those individuals, they're still going to need to get a paycheck. And so why don't we start promoting these new opportunities for them and try to get them into new training programs and get the skills that may equate to a new job or a new opportunity here in our region. So we've got a lot of great opportunities. And so working with Doug and economic development, really identifying where those opportunities are, working with our educational partners to put new programs in place, and then starting to promote these to the individuals. We're really taking the approach of, we don't know if COVID's going to come back in the fall or next year. And so there's a lot of essential opportunities here in our region that are certain right now in very uncertain times. And so promoting those careers may be an opportunity to help individuals.
Sean, can you give us a sense of the kinds of jobs in the region from your observation that have been lost, and what might be some examples of those kinds of jobs, the people who held those kinds of jobs being able to retrain for another opportunity?
Sure. So, I mean, clearly retail and hospitality have been hit the hardest, no doubt about that. But there have been some other small business that have been hit, and unfortunately, they're predicting some of those are just not going to be able to come back right now. So, a lot of management in those companies, a lot of individuals who may have just taken a job right out of college and was working in the hospitality industry or the retail industry that have some skill sets. Really, if you talk to some employers before COVID, they would say, if you give me somebody with soft skills, somebody with the skills to show up to work on time, we will help train them. We will provide them the opportunity. And so I never want to say that XYZ skill at one area equates to another area, because it's really around a roadmap and getting the individual the skills they need to move forward. And so, there's just a lot of opportunities. We just got to educate individuals about what those opportunities are.
So if someone is unemployed right now, we know there are unemployment benefits that are that exist right now. We don't really kind of know what the future of that is going to be. I'm guessing the Workforce Council would be a great place to connect with.
Absolutely. Please reach out to us. We have the services. Our centers have been closed to the public, unfortunately, since COVID, but we're in the process of setting up online registrations where we can actually do appointments. So we're running full force, just doing it very different like everybody else is. We have the opportunity of getting individual training. And so, yes, please reach out to us and we can help the individuals. And on the business side, I'm sure there's a lot of businesses on this call as well. We have the opportunity where we can do on-the-job training and incumbent worker training. And so just encourage individuals to reach out to us and let's see how we can help them.
Terrific. That's great. You know, and you want to be sure not to sound too Pollyanna with this, because people are really hurting and businesses are really hurting. And if we head into the fall with 10% unemployment, that's obviously not going to be pleasant. But it does strike me that there are some, and you're talking about this, Sean, and you're talking about this, Doug, that there are some opportunities that the moment has delivered to us maybe faster than we thought we would have those opportunities. Nancy Gurdon is with us. I'm so glad she's here, because I think one of those opportunities, Nancy is with the Strom Entrepreneurial Center, leads and directs a lot of those engagements at the Strom College of Business. Nancy, I think one of the areas that you're particularly interested in this moment is ramping up the maritime collaboration, because the water hasn't gone away.
No, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you, Cathy. It's great to be part of this panel. What's exciting is a number of organizations, some of which are represented here, my colleagues on the panel, as well as Old Dominion University. President Broderick, it's hard to remember, it feels like an eon ago when he set up the Economic Development Catalyst Task Force to look at how ODU might play a much bigger role in terms of leveraging tech talent and innovation in our region. And literally what happened, we had over 24 people from the community back in the fall. We looked around and said, you know, Hampton Roads has such an amazing array of assets and opportunities. We often overlook them. You know, we've got the Navy, we've got the port, we have this new developing offshore wind industry, as Sean and Doug have spoken about. Obviously, we have some very amazing industries here already. We have a whole resilience activity happening. And then we have Old Dominion, which really offers a number of programs. And so it's almost like we overlook all of these assets. And so a combination of that organization determining to focus more directly on maritime, as well as a number of activities that were already happening in the community, all have coalesced over the past several months, and even during these period of time when we've all been somewhat sequestered. And literally what's coming together in partnership with the activities that have been discussed already with 757 Recovery is an initiative called the Hampton Roads Maritime Collaborative for Growth and Innovation. And its goal is to really focus single-mindedly on all of these amazing assets we have as a region and what they can be as an economic driver for our region. So it's a today opportunity, you know, as Doug has described and as Sean have described, with very specific jobs, but we have a whole opportunity to build on these assets that frankly no other region has. They really do not. And so it's very exciting today and also for the future of the region.
Nancy, I want to ask you about that no other region has statement. We are told that our port, you know, is competitive with other ports on the East Coast, that there are, you know, we compete with Charleston, we compete with Baltimore. You just said that we have assets that nobody else has. What are some of those, and do those sort of give us a leg up, even as it relates to port development? Does that make sense?
Yes, happy to answer it. I think what happens sometimes is the definition of the word maritime sounds maybe sort of been around for decades, centuries. It's important, we all understand that, but there's certainly a lot of innovation and development that's going on in that arena. And so when I speak about assets, it's the fact that not only do we have a world-class port, but obviously the port itself is looking at innovation. We have the Navy is here, and they have actually talked with us about a pilot in this region that would really continue to build on our assets. The fact that we have offshore wind, we often don't think about that as a quote unquote maritime asset, and it is. This is a very, very significant development for our region that other areas do not have for a variety of physical attribute reasons, but also developmental reasons. And so those are just a couple. And of course, we have amazing training activities. We have a great supply chain base that we're building. This ability to focus on resilience and treat it not as a barrier, but as an opportunity is huge. And then again, universities and other K through 12 and training programs, all of which when you add up, it's a 1 + 1 = 3. That's the difference.
That's really interesting because that you're right. I mean, if you look at it that way, we really do have this amazing connection of really a unique kind of combination there. So as you look at this moment, Nancy, what do you think it foretells for maybe 6, 12, 18, 24 months from now? Where do you expect to see this effort going?
Well, I'd actually like to answer that on 2 levels. One is, aside from the maritime, our Institute for Innovation Entrepreneurship at ODU, we work with companies and entrepreneurs in the community and on the campus both. So we see the array of organizations. And thinking about the future, a lot of our advice to companies is, first of all, sort of like 3 C's. The first C is your cash flow, managing today's world. The second C is around your customer base, but the third, and looking to the future, is creativity. How do you maybe reimagine your business in a different way? How do you think about new opportunities? So first and foremost, those are some of the major activities that we really deal with at a company individual level. But you can take that same approach and think about the future for maritime. The first thing is just looking at the basics of what's today in maritime. And again, Sean and Doug have spoken to some of that already. But the opportunity here really is looking ahead, where we would actually have, in the months ahead, we'd be able to see some of the early obvious beginnings of this offshore wind industry, physically showing up. We actually will be able to see some of these opportunities with our Navy pilot. So there are many things that we think are really going to make a difference over the year and a half in a very short period of time.
That's fantastic. Doug, we did have, and thank you for the question in the chat. If you have some questions, do be sure to put them in the chat and we will work them into our conversation. Doug, one of our guests this morning wants to know if it is possible, and if so, how, does one volunteer for one of these committees that you're standing up, one of these 10 committees?
I'll make a note. I'll answer that one. I want to build on what Nancy just said before I answer that, though, Cathy. And it's this idea of embracing the maritime industry. And I've been messing around in economic development here for a long, long time. And in many ways, we have almost argued that we needed to be diversifying away from the maritime and away from the Navy. And I think because of Nancy and Dovey Wynn and John Broderick and Admiral Archizell and some folks, we finally understand that maritime is our DNA. And at a time when it's really going to be about building existing business, this is playing the hand we're dealt and playing to our assets. And so I really think this is going to be an opportunity to let us dig out of this faster with not only offshore wind, but ship repair and shipbuilding. So just wanted to say that.
I actually have a funny little story about that same point. In an unnamed city, I won't name it, a number of us, probably back in the fall, pre-COVID, visited to look at how they do economic development. And it was a listen and learn kind of session. And so we're listening, they're talking and so on. And at one point, one of the people said, "Why are you here? You have water. You have a Navy, you have the port, you have all this industry. Why are you asking us for guidance?" It was very funny, and it really brought the point home.
Yeah, I think that's such a great story, Nancy, because I do think sometimes we are not very good at sort of loving the things we are and the things we have and the assets that we can bring to the rest of the world. Sometimes we do have a little bit of an inferiority complex. So I'm so glad you told that story. So apparently, we have some stuff to be proud of here and stuff to build on. Doug,
Cathy, you want me to answer that volunteer question? So several ways. The easiest, frankly, reach out directly to me, Doug Smith at 757alliance.com is probably the quickest. But we've also, this website, 757recovery.com, is where we're going to place all the information about this recovery process. All of the papers will be put there. We're going to have some thought pieces that are already out there. There's already a tremendous amount of information there, so you'll be able to go to that site and get engaged and volunteer as well. But we'd love to have folks from this group chime in.
Absolutely. You know, that there is always a need for leadership, especially around these regional issues. And the more people you get in that mix, the better the outcome is. And so that is a really very robust conversation underway at 757recovery.com. So I hope you'll check that out. There's a blog, there's a forum. They've already done, Doug, I think 2 surveys, right? We have 2 sets of surveys up there. And
Yes.
you can see how people how companies in this region are responding and reacting in the moment.
Yeah, we had early on the morning of that the Senate adopted or approved the CARES Act. We had about 70 business leaders on the phone with Senator Warner, who was filling us in on what seemed to be happening. And what we learned was a couple of things. One, the information that we had about how businesses were being impacted was purely anecdotal. Everybody had a story. I've got a client that this has happened or that's happened. So we needed real data, which led to these surveys. And there was also a real thirst for making sense of all the information. So all this information flowing at businesses, who can help me understand it? And so the forum that you've mentioned is where we have had local bankers, local attorneys, local accountants. We had the folks from Xavier Beal from Huntington Ingalls talk about how Huntington Ingalls has reopened and the processes they put through. And it's a message board, so you can go back and look at it anytime. So we think it's been a really effective tool. But the surveys, we're asking some base questions each time of things like, how many people have you lost revenue? Have you laid off people? How are you being impacted? The second round asked really specific questions about the CARES Act. And that's when we started learning that people really wanted to understand the PPP program. And that's when we got some experts on the PPP program. The third survey will go out in probably mid-July, ask some of those same questions again, but also the committee chairs are going to give us the questions that they want to hear answers to from the business community, whether it's about healthcare or shared services or what the different groups are that are out there. So those surveys have really been good tools for us to have data.
Great. So that's 757recovery.com. And if you, right on the front page, there's a contact link. You click that, give your information, and there's a block that says, how do you want to be involved? So lots of opportunities to volunteer there. Boy, we have a question that really, I think, mirrors the experience of a number of people. I was talking to somebody the other day who runs an office who was saying that she was looking for somebody to come in and clean. She had the overnight crews, obviously, but wanted somebody to come in and clean midday just to kind of do an extra surface clean midday, and was having great trouble finding people. And the word that she was told, and this is what our questioner asks as well, is that the unemployment benefits people are getting are better than their average wages. Now, that probably begs a larger conversation around those issues from a systemic perspective, but right now the question is, how can businesses overcome that reality where it exists and get people back to work? Sean, you're somebody who understands all of those benefit processes. How would you answer that?
Well, it is one of those issues that you didn't think was going to happen, but unfortunately it did. There are some individuals right now that are making more money than they were in their jobs on unemployment. And the governor has waived the job search requirement under unemployment as well. So there's really no benefit of getting off on unemployment, other than the fact that at some point it's going to go away. And second, the job search piece is going to come back. And we're encouraging individuals, don't miss your opportunity. You may not have that opportunity moving forward. As Doug mentioned, not all the jobs are going to come back. And you could find yourself in the point of there not being this extra unemployment, there not being a job out there for you. And you could be in worse off shape now than you were before. So we really are encouraging that. And I will say, there are a lot of individuals out there who don't care that they're getting the extra money. They want a job. They understand the benefits of having a job, especially in this COVID environment. Staying at home, I don't know about you, but sitting on my couch was not the best thing for me. And I didn't like that at all. And there are a lot of people like that have the work ethic that they want to get into the opportunity. So what we do, again, encourage businesses, if they're having those issues, reach out to one of our organizations that can connect you up with individuals who are looking for those opportunities. And we'll make those connections for you. Yeah, I want to, if you don't mind too, you mentioned earlier, it sounds like we may be being a little Pollyanna around this as well. But I like to flip it and say we're really being proactive and being positive, because I think we could sit back and let it all happen to us and just see where it all plays out. But with Doug's leadership and Brian Stevens at the Chamber and a number of leaders taking this proactive stance and trying to get the region revved up to come back is really what's going to put us into a great spot when this economy bounces back. And I do feel like it's going to bounce back pretty quick with us taking the leadership in that.
Well, one certainly hopes. One certainly hopes. So again, be sure to pop your questions in the chat box. That'll be fine. And we're so glad to have our guests with us today. We're still trying to get Ann back in the conversation. We'll, by we, of course, I mean Billy. We'll continue to work on that. And so one of the things that I'm hearing from people is that right now, unemployment is out there. Businesses are trying to figure out who's going to stay, who's going to go. And the end of the summer or the fall may be another inflection point in that regard, that businesses will by then have its chance to see, okay, are my revenues coming back enough to keep these folks? Maybe the unemployment picture is different in terms of benefits is different at that point. As you look ahead, Doug, I'm going to put this to you and all three of you. Where do you see the next point that was not unlike the moment when the first PPP package was passed, where people we're going to be able to point to that and say, okay, we kind of rode it along here for a while. Now things are different.
I think when phase 3 hits us and we open up full bore, I think that's going to be the next big point for us. When businesses are now, they don't have to, they have the restrictions and things start to change. So, and I think it's going to be sooner than sorry, my phone's ringing. Sooner than we expect. Phase 3 is going to happen, and I think people are ready to get out there, ready to get back to work, ready to get their businesses open. And I think that's when you're going to start seeing some things start to move forward fairly quickly. And again, I think that's going to be sooner than later.
So,
gotten in this morning, it sounded like the governor may say something on his 2 o'clock conference call or press statement.
Earlier this week, I think the sense was it was going to be delayed a bit. So, so who knows? Those have been very newsworthy events, and they happen now on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 2 o'clock. Nancy, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, the other comment I would make, obviously I'm at Old Dominion University, and universities have been planning these issues as well. It's been well publicized across the country and certainly here locally. At some level, we're almost like the canary in the cave type situations, because we're really going to have large aggregations of people. We're trying to figure out various scenarios. We've already talked through. Obviously, we've changed dramatically the nature of what the fall will look like. But even though we have a game plan, we have scenarios. So at some level, it's really reflective probably of what every organization is doing. Is you really have to plan as you can, but realize that you may have to change. And I know the word pivot is overused quite a bit, but that's true. It's being prepared. And so it's almost, you almost have to keep that in mind as opposed to an end or a change that's going to all of a sudden break the clouds.
Yeah.
And
that is such a great point. This is going to be a rolling scenario where we have to be operational and strategic all at the same time. And, I suppose there's opportunities. Doug?
Yeah, I want to build on this ODU piece, and there's a program out there that I think folks out here would like to hear about. Jeff Tanner, who's the dean of the business school, has something called Open for Business, and it's an opportunity to help as many as 150 businesses with business students to come in and do projects. And one of the benefits that's come out of this for me is a much stronger relationship between our organization and Old Dominion University. And I think we've all, over the years talked about Old Dominion becoming sort of the economic development university for the region. And it's really starting to happen under the leadership of Nancy and Dr. Broderick and Jeff Tanner. And for example, they're going to, as I think I mentioned, they're going to staff these committees for us. So business students are going to do frankly, the research work and write the papers for these committees. But there are some tremendous resources for businesses that are struggling. Go look at that it's open, and then the number 4, open for business, that the Strome College is doing. Frankly, we're taking advantage of it. I've got one of the business classes is doing a study for us about the new workforce and what remote work can perhaps look like relative to Hampton Roads and how we might try to leverage and take advantage of that. And so that I told Jeff Tanner the other night that that the relationship that he and I have developed that we didn't have before this has really helped our organization, and I think it's going to help the regional economy.
I'm so glad you said that, because one of the things you noted is that you all are talking very regularly. I think you said like every other couple times a week, something like that. I think that's really an important point in the scenario, is that it really does give us an opportunity to connect on a very different level with people as we work our way through this. Well, we promised you a poll, so we have one. Billy Garland, who is fantastic. He's got the best title in the world. He's called a solution architect. I love that.
We need him.
That's great, right? He is a solution architect with Tribune Publishing. Billy, what do you want to go ahead and put the question up?
Yes, ma'am.
So here's the question. If your business has a physical location, have you reopened yet? And so, Billy, how can people participate in this poll? What should they do at this point?
Well, most of you seem to have already figured it out, with about 20% of all attendants already voting, and that percentage is going up right now. You should see that poll directly on your screen. It should be easy enough to interact with that and provide your response. So we'll give it just a second. We just hit 40% of that vote coming in, so give it just a second for that to come through, and we'll be glad to give some of those results in real time.
Billy, you make a great co-host. I might have a radio opportunity for you. You never know.
I can be the color guy. We'll make it work.
These are interesting times, aren't they? Yeah, so continue to put your questions in there. The question again, if your business has a physical location, have you reopened yet? And Billy, I rely on you to let me know when we're there.
Well, in the interest of time, we are about 1 minute and 5 seconds into the poll being live. And I can see with about 60% of the voting in, 40% of respondents are saying that yes, they have reopened. 50% are saying no, with about 10% remaining saying that their business does not have a physical location.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so 40% you said have reopened. Is that what you said?
Yeah, actually, now that's up to 41%, dropping the no down to 49%.
Okay.
So a minute and a half in, I'm going to drop this poll down so we can return to the conversation. But thank you guys so much. We'll look forward to future ones.
Thank you, Billy. I appreciate it. We've got another couple of poll questions for you in the course of our conversation today. Our next one, just so you can start thinking about it, has to do with how comfortable you are personally returning to business as normal with removing the social distancing measures that have been in place to date. And again, some of that may be obviated by state and federal requirements as they roll along, but that question will be coming to you shortly. And then we also have a question about remote working and to what extent you plan to continue to have your team working remotely, to what extent you plan to have them return to the office. Sean, it really strikes me, these questions around how we do this, who comes back, who stays home, have some employment implications in terms of how we kind of reimagine some of these jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're seeing that nonstop, even in my own organization. What can we do now online? And honestly, what we hear from businesses is they really weren't prepared to work from home. I actually did not have a webcam on my computer before this crisis hit, which is surprisingly, and that I'm not the only one that's like that. And so I do believe that one of the changes we're going to have is that individuals are going to be able to start to work from home. But like Doug said, we're going to have to make sure that we understand that work-life balance. I don't know about you, but I've been busier now than I've ever been because I don't have to worry about drive times. I don't have to worry about, getting to one meeting to another. It's meeting after meeting after meeting. And so we've got to make sure that we keep that balance going. But I do think that there's going to be a lot of changes in the industry. But you got to remember too that there's a lot of businesses in our region that are going to still be a lot of hands-on type activities. The maritime industry is going to be one of those that's probably not going to impact as much when it comes to the skilled trades and things like that.
It's a great point. I want to just check, make sure nobody else wants to comment on that before we go to some of the questions that were submitted in advance. Doug, I see you.
Yeah, well, so I think it's really going to be interesting to see how the remote working really plays out, right? We've hired a consultant, and we'd hired him actually before this started to help us develop an office strategy for the region. We've really never had one, and so as we got into this conversation, we said, all right, we need to talk about what does that look like in a COVID environment and a post-COVID environment. And one of the comments yesterday was, this pendulum may not swing as far as everybody thinks it will. That once we have a vaccine, we will, many will want to come back to the office for that social engagement as much as anyone else. So we're doing two studies. We're having those folks look at our markets and help us really understand what our product is and who our prospects can be. But Old Dominion is helping us start to look at what does this perhaps redistributed economy look like, and if I don't have to be in the headquarters, maybe I'm not at home, but maybe I'm in a satellite office in Hampton Roads where the cost of operating are cheaper and the quality of life is better, and can we get some IT and shared services and so some of those sorts of things. So I think it'll be really interesting to see what it looks like, but then what are the opportunities that present themselves for us. And the last comment is, let's say we're right, and that there are a lot of remote workers that you've seen a lot of people leave New York as an example. So now they're going to come down here. For the locality, that's not necessarily a good thing financially. Great for the state because that payroll tax is going to come to the state, but that worker at home is not paying real estate. We're not paying real estate tax for them and those sorts of things on that office that is good for the locality. So I think there'll be some really interesting conversations about how revenue gets shared that comes into the state and local government in this new world.
This new world is actually the subject of a lot of the pre-submitted questions, and they many of them revolve around this essential concept. That many people don't think we're going back to the way things used to be, that we will indeed have something we might call the new normal if you buy that phrase. And so I want to get each of you to comment on what you think that new normal will look like. Doug, you just talked about the idea that maybe not as many will be working from home as now presently think they will be.
Yeah, I'd say maybe two things. The best line I've heard, and I think it was Bruce Thompson that started this a while back, was, we've got to figure out what the bridge to a vaccine is, right? So I do think there's almost two phases to this. One is kind of what are we going to look like until there's a vaccine, and then once you have that vaccine, what do we look like? And I think there will be, I think for my organization, I think people will be able to work from home more frequently, but I don't know that people will work from home permanent. So many people work from home permanently as some think, but we don't know. And frankly, it's why we're tapping into these consultants and Old Dominion and some other people out of market to say, what are you seeing in other markets? For example, we've already seen the office rates in San Francisco have dropped 15% since COVID started.
Wow. You mean the cost of office? The
cost of them, right. So we're seeing companies that are really backing off of smaller leases to push people home. But with that said, you're liable to need more space for less people when you go forward, because you're going to want that social distancing. And last thing I'll say is, so for my example, we were looking at moving, and we were going to go to this very open floor plan with lots of collaborative space, because I think that's how we would work best. We're now in a series of offices. Well, I got to tell you, that series of offices is probably going to work well for us until there is a vaccine. So even how you look when you go back to work, I think will be different, and that's to be determined.
Yeah, really. Nancy, how about you?
Yeah, I can comment on this. Two different, slightly different perspectives. One is from the entrepreneur's perspective, because obviously we work with entrepreneurs in the community and across campus both. But what's interesting is, you know, the whole point of entrepreneurship is collaborating, networking, gathering, sharing, diversity, engagement, all of those kinds of words, which typically have meant big spaces, lots of gatherings, lots of working together, sharing ideas, ideas colliding, and so on. So at some level, you know, that business model and those floor plans don't work. And it's really interesting. We've heard from some entrepreneurs already that they're wondering if they can maybe continue to work remotely, particularly newer companies where they're looking at costs, and remote may be actually a better solution for them. So I think it's going to be interesting to watch as it relates to office space. A lot of our very popular co-working and shared spaces, you know, that we have not only here in Hampton Roads but across the country. So it's going to be interesting to watch how that evolves, because, you know, the whole point was to bring people together. And the other comment I would make is, you know, as a university, we've had a little bit of experience on sort of how people adapt to having a virtual world and a face-to-face world way before even COVID happened. And the short answer is the middle seems to work. You know, it's the mix that often is selected. So when we look at some of our students in the past who could go online completely, those who could go face-to-face completely, interestingly enough, there was a very large proportion that liked the mix. So that may be a harbinger of what we'll see going ahead.
You know, one thing that strikes me about this work from home environment, I had a guest on my radio show a couple of weeks ago who was saying she's been covering teleworking for since the 90s. And she said everybody gets really jazzed up in this moment about everybody's going to be at home and it's going to be great. She said she expects that where this will shake out is people who can work from home will be doing that about 1 to 2 days a week. And the other thing she noted, and I think this is really important, is that work from home is fine if you have built your team. You know, if you take an existing team with strong relationships and you put them in remote locations, you know, they can kind of keep going. It's real hard to integrate new people, I think, into that social mix. You almost, you know, that is a place where the physical environment really does get missed. So I would just note that observation. I've heard that from a number of people. Billy, I think we have another poll question, and it speaks to this issue of comfort returning to work.
Yes, ma'am. So we're going to launch this poll right now, and it's very explicitly that. It's how comfortable are you with the idea of returning to work and kind of eliminating some of those social distancing protocols that we put out there. And so already getting some response, and that's great. Thank you for your engagement on that.
And I think so much of the answer to this question, you know, will depend on people's personal circumstance, and that'll be another challenging issue, I think, to manage from a leadership perspective, that you are going to have people who are in different categories on this, different categories of risk and different categories of comfort.
Yes, ma'am. And so just 30 seconds into the poll, we're already at about 60% responding. And I will tell you what I find interesting about this is the majority of the responses are actually filtering in to the somewhat comfortable or somewhat uncomfortable, with 20% and 36% respectively. The either end of the spectrum is really staying below that 20% threshold, with only 12% saying very comfortable, 14% saying very uncomfortable. But I think it's significant, and we shouldn't ignore those that are in that 9% in the middle of the spectrum that are simply saying that they're unsure.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you know, I think that's significant too, Billy, the idea that there is not a lot of confidence on either end of this, that a lot of people are in the middle. And again, a month from now, that could look very different, who knows. But we have a number of questions. Doug, go ahead. Did you want to?
I just want to comment on the survey, and just a thought. So we've done a return to work survey with our employees and asked kind of these same kind of questions. How worried are you personally? You know, how effective have you been? What kind of things have gotten in your way? And I got to tell you, the answers surprised me a little bit in that there was a confidential survey, and folks are more worried, more concerned than they have led on in a group setting, right? So just a tool your listeners might want to use is that confidential survey of your employees to find out how they're really feeling. I think it also sends a strong message that you care about how they're feeling.
Sure.
But it's been some really good information that will certainly influence how we come back and how we look when we come back.
And so obviously, without disclosing anything, what were some of their concerns? Especially, I think it's very interesting that in a group setting, they're like, a little more confident about coming back. But then when you get them in a survey alone, it's kind of a little bit of a different story. What are they concerned
It
about?
is, and I think you've got, and this is not necessarily my group, but just what you hear is, I know what you look like and how you behave when you're at work. I don't know what you're doing on the weekend and where you're going and what your social, how you're interacting, who you're mixing with, and so that's I think is a factor. We've also, one of the questions was just around what issues do you have, and not surprising, there are childcare issues, there are different things that come up. So some of them is just these open-ended questions of kind of what worries you, and it's been really good feedback for us.
Sean, that childcare issue is critically important as we think about returning. I was talking yesterday to the superintendent of Virginia Beach City Schools, Dr. Aaron Spence, and it sounds like what some of the school systems in the region are looking at is some combination of a couple of days at school and a couple of days at home. Obviously, no specifics on that yet, but that does seem to be a factor that's in the mix here. The first thing I thought of when I heard that is, wow, what about these working parents? To what degree is childcare a factor either in present work circumstances or in looking for a new opportunity?
I think it hits on both. Childcare is going to be a huge issue, and we hear that right now from individuals who are going back to work. That is part of the unemployment piece too. They can stay home with their children right now and continue to collect unemployment. It's going to be a major issue, and I think it's all going to come around when the reopening as well, because child care centers have been impacted right now. So when they can get back to full capacity, we'll have to see how that works out. But even on my staff, we're having to take that into consideration when somebody has child care. My wife's also a teacher, so we're having to think that through as well. There's a lot of issues. You think that there's the big answers to some of these things, but then when you go to the second and third level of what we need to be dealing with, those are where we're really going to have to start making the changes around childcare and things. Those are really where are going to impact how we move forward into this new norm.
I don't know that any of you can answer this, and please just feel free to say if you can't. But I've been thinking a lot about the fiber ring and connectivity, which is such an issue, particularly when people are in their houses trying to work and go to school all at the same time. And we know that there are varying degrees of security, security meaning how reliable, that's a better word, reliability in this regard. How are those conversations about the fiber ring and the offshore cables? Does that give us any hope here for the future when it comes to a community that may be working at least some days a week from home?
Yeah, I think it certainly does in the long term, and obviously what you're talking about is the undersea cables that are coming over from Spain and others, and what we're trying to do with the regional fiber ring is tap into that. You said security. One of the Meet the Experts we've had was Darius Davenport from Crenshaw, Ware and Martin did a thread on cybersecurity and the issue, and I would tell you, as I'm sitting there listening to him, I'm realizing that our organization is vulnerable. And I think I'd encourage folks to go look at that thread of the blog he posted and some of the things you can be doing as a small business with people working from home to make sure that you are protecting your data and your customers' data and being smart.
Anybody else want to comment on that before we move on? Okay, there are two questions that are kind of interrelated, and they get back to this comfort level that people have right at this moment. Some folks want to know, and I would love to know this from each of you, when are people going to be comfortable with one-on-one meetings? When are businesses receptive to that right now? I'm sure all of you have that opportunity in the course of your day. And also, the other question has to do with how do you discuss the need to get the economy back to work without sounding callous or indifferent to people who are struggling with COVID-19. I'm just going to go round robin here. Who wants to start?
Yeah, in terms of the comfort for work, I think it's an individual question. It's a personal question. It's also a company by company question. But the best way I've heard it said is, how do you make your employees and your customers comfortable working under this persistent threat? right? And I think it's going to be the things that you put in place that make me feel like you're taking this stuff seriously. And I go back again to this forum where we had the folks from Huntington Ingalls, Xavier Beal on, talking about they have 30,000 people working in there, and this is now 2 or 3 weeks old. They had 30 cases of COVID, and like half those people had come back to work. They have figured this thing out, and folks are figuring it out, and how you can make that piece comfortable. I think it's going to be the key, and it's watch what folks are doing. The state chamber is putting out some good information. The local chambers are putting out some good information, so you don't have to go create this stuff from start. CDC is putting out some good information, so I think it's out there, and you're just going to have to put your individual plan in place that makes your folks comfortable.
Right. Yeah, I would echo a lot of that. I mean, the good thing is there's a lot of great guidance. So again, from an Old Dominion University perspective, we have a combination of what's happening at the state level. You know, everything that Doug spoke about in terms of guidance has been very helpful. And then we at ODU have our own protocols and procedures. So there's a number of layers here, and these aren't just guidelines, but they really go deep. At least I can speak to ODU. I mean, they go deep into some very specific practices. So it is going to be interesting on one-on-one, and it's interesting about one-on-one because, again, we see a lot in the past. In the past, a lot of the one-on-one has been one-on-one walk-in new traffic, you know, not meetings with a staff member, somebody that I already know. But that's the whole point. We are an open access location. We are open at Bank Street downtown Norfolk. We are open on the Strome in Entrepreneurial Center on the campus, and that was the whole point, was to have walk-ins. So we may have to change our engagement because, you know, that may no longer fly at some point on both sides. You know, people may not feel as comfortable to do that, and we may not feel as comfortable to have those meetings, and we may, you know, hold those virtually.
Wow. Sean, how about you? A thought on that?
Yeah, I agree with both. I would say at this point, you know, we're all going to be doing this for the foreseeable future. But I think at some point we're going to just, it's one of those things, you just offer it. Would you like to meet in person, or do you want to meet via Zoom or something like that? I think when we do start meeting in person, the handshake's probably going to be gone. There's no, you know, more the elbow pump.
Curtsy. Everybody can just curtsy. I think that would be.
That's right. So I think it's going to be part of the new norm. You're going to either offer up a Zoom or you're going to offer up a in-person meeting, and that's probably how it's going to be. I think the things that we're going to hopefully look forward to, and I know Brian Stevens and Bob McKenna on the Peninsula are looking at this, is when do we start bringing back those interactive experiences like the chamber forums and things like that, where a lot of business happens, you know, you make your connections. And so those are not easy to happen when you don't have that interaction going on. So that's, we need to really figure out how those start to happen again as well. I know they're working on that.
So much of the power of those gathering opportunities happens before the program and after the program. Not to say the program's not good. I'm just saying you can hobnob with people before and after. Doug Smith, how about you? What do you think this looks like moving forward?
Well, just what I said. I think it's that comfort level. But what's going to be hard for us is when you, not everybody's going to have the same comfort in the same situation. And so when you offer up that meeting or Zoom, so I will tell you, I think we're going to be slow to come back to board meetings. And so we're having an investor meeting here shortly, and we're offering up 2 of them that'll be online. And I anticipate that we'll stay online for a while. Again, it's that bridge to the vaccine.
Yeah, it's such a great point. And, you know, when you think about, we've talked about this issue before, but you have, what, 4 generations, maybe soon 5 generations that work together. You know, there are very specific sort of characteristics of each of those generations that will be different in this new environment, that will cause them to respond differently to the request of, are we going online or are we going in person? And it seems to me, you know, there's that whole business that we used to talk about where your office is located and your proximity to the leader and all the rest of that. You know, it seems to me we're going to do a fundamental rethink on some of that stuff, or you know, we're just going to have to be looking at that and see how that changes. And, you know, maybe it changes, maybe it doesn't. We are committed as always. We may not have bacon, and some of us may be in our pajamas, but we always end on time. So we are good. We are just about to do that. But I do want to thank each of you for being with us today. We were unable to get Ann Connor back from Town Bank, but I know that Town has been distributing a lot of those PPP funds.
Absolutely.
So Town might be a great place to talk to. I'm sure Ann would be willing to do that. As well, there are some great question and answer forums on that on 757recovery.com. And they're continuing to refresh that very question because there, who knows if there'll be another wave. There are some questions there that answer some concerns that have been expressed around repayment. So I do refer you to that. Again, I want to thank Cox Business Solutions and Inside Business. InsideBiz.com is the website. Please visit both of those often. My thanks to Billy Garland, most especially for his support during the show. He made this whole first experience very easy. So thanks to all of you for joining us. Have a great day, and we'll see you again next quarter.